Elara Vance was an orphan. This was the first and most important fact in the town of Prospect Creek. It defined her existence more than her quiet nature, more than the startling grey of her eyes, more than the calloused hands that spoke of a life of labour. She was 18 years old when her father, a man the town had always considered odd, succumbed to a lung fever in the dead of winter. He left her with precisely 3 things of value: a worn-out draft horse named Jasper, the deed to a worthless plot of stony land on the north-facing slope of Granite Hill, and a heavy wooden chest filled with his leather-bound journals. The town, in a rare fit of charity, allowed her to stay in her father's small, draughty cabin. They expected her to fail. They expected her to sell the land for pennies, sell the horse for meat, and leave town, or marry some lonely farmer out of desperation. Elara did none of these things. For 6 months, she did nothing but read. Every night, by the flickering light of a tallow candle, she traced the lines of her father's elegant, spidery script. He had not been just an odd man. He had been a geologist and a self-taught engineer. The journals were not ramblings, they were meticulous records. They contained decades of observations about Prospect Creek's unique climate, its unforgiving geology, its brutal, cyclical weather patterns. He wrote of wind speeds and snow loads. He drew diagrams of thermal mass and passive ventilation. He logged barometric pressure readings going back 30 years. And he wrote, with a chilling certainty, of the 100-year winter. It was a term the old-timers used, a folk tale of a winter so savage it could erase a settlement from the map. But her father had not treated it as a folk tale. He had treated it as an inevitability. He had calculated its return. His final entries were frantic, filled with sketches of a structure he called the Sunken Hearth, a dwelling not built upon the earth, but within it. A shelter designed to use the granite of the hill as a heat sink and the inevitable massive snowfall as a blanket of insulation. Elara closed the final journal on a cool August morning. She looked at her father's last, desperate calculation. According to his data, the winter was 4 years away. She made her decision. She would build it. Her first stop was the office of Mayor Thompson. He was a portly man whose authority rested on a gold watch chain and a perpetually disappointed expression. She laid one of her father's diagrams on his cluttered desk. It showed a cross-section of the hill, with the dwelling dug into its face, complete with ventilation shafts and a deep, cold storage cellar. "I need to file a building claim," she stated, her voice clear and steady. Mayor Thompson peered at the drawing over his spectacles. He looked at her, then back at the drawing. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. "A cellar, Miss Vance? A rather ambitious one. Planning on storing a great many potatoes?" "It's not a cellar," Elara corrected him. "It's a house." The mayor leaned back, the chair creaking in protest. He chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "A house? In the ground? Child, people don't live in holes like badgers. We live in proper, civilized homes, with windows and floors, raised off the damp." "The ground isn't damp if you drain it properly," she said, pointing to the diagram. "And the earth maintains a constant temperature. It's warmer in winter and cooler in summer. The snow will insulate it." "The snow will crush it," he scoffed. "This is madness. It's unhealthy. Your father filled your head with nonsense. I will not approve a permit for a grave. Go home, child. Find a husband. That's a more suitable project for a young woman." She was dismissed. The rejection was absolute. Word of Elara's folly, as it was immediately christened, spread through Prospect Creek like a contagion. It became the town's favourite joke. The centre of this mockery was Silas Croft, the wealthiest rancher in the valley. Croft was in the process of building a new home for himself on a sprawling piece of riverfront land. It was the antithesis of Elara's design, a massive two-storey affair with enormous glass windows facing the mountains, thin walls, and a wide, exposed porch. It was a monument to his wealth and his belief in modern progress. He saw Elara in the general store a week later, buying a heavy-duty shovel head and a new pickaxe. "Heard you're taking up mining, Elara," Croft boomed so everyone could hear. "Looking for gold, or just a place to hibernate?" The men around the stove roared with laughter. Elara simply paid for her tools and left. The professional skepticism came from Dr. Albright. He was a man who believed his university education made him an expert on all matters. "Living underground," he declared one afternoon at the post office, "is a recipe for consumption. The dampness seeps into the bones, causes rheumatism. The lack of sunlight breeds melancholy. It is, from a medical perspective, profoundly unwise." He adjusted his spectacles, looking smugly at his audience. "She'll be dead of lung rot before the first winter is through." Soon, a new phrase entered the town's lexicon. When someone did something foolish, pointless, or backward, people would say they were pulling an Elara. It was a cruel, sharp-edged joke that followed her everywhere. Children would see her leading Jasper up the path to Granite Hill, the horse laden with tools, and they would cup their hands to their mouths, shouting, "Don't dig too deep, Elara! You might pop out in China!" She ignored them all. Their voices were just noise, like the wind in the pines. The only voice she listened to was the calm, methodical one in her father's journals. The work began. The first year was the year of the earth. She marked out a 20 by 30-foot rectangle at the base of the hill. Then she began to dig. It was brutal, soul-crushing labor. The topsoil was thin, giving way to dense, rocky clay that fought the shovel for every inch. She worked from sunup to sundown. Her hands, already tough, blistered, bled, and then hardened into thick pads of leather. Her back screamed in protest. Jasper was her partner. She would dig and pile, and he would haul. Using a heavy-duty sledge she'd fashioned, he would drag load after load of earth and rock away from the site, depositing it downslope where it would eventually form a protective berm. They worked in a silent, practiced rhythm. The only sounds were the scrape of steel on stone, the creak of leather harness, and the steady, patient breathing of the horse. By the end of the first year, she had excavated a pit 12 feet deep. She had hit the solid granite face of the hill. The townspeople, who sometimes walked up the path to gawk at her progress, saw only a giant, ugly hole in the ground. They saw failure. Elara saw the foundation. The second year was the year of the stone. This was the work her father's journals had prepared her for most. It was not about brute force, but about precision. She spent a month just studying the granite face, tapping it with a hammer, listening to the resonance, finding its grain and its hidden fracture lines. Following his diagrams, she began to shape the entrance. It was slow, meticulous work, with a star drill and a sledgehammer. Tap, turn, creating a line of holes, inserting wedges, and then striking them in sequence to split the rock with controlled force. She carved out a perfect archway, 6 feet wide and 7 feet high. The keystone was a masterpiece of leverage and geometry. A 200-pound wedge of granite she shaped and then maneuvered into place using a system of levers and Jasper's steady strength. The day it slid into place, settling with a deep, resonant thud, was the first time she had smiled in 2 years. She spent the rest of the year smoothing the interior walls of the main chamber, not perfectly flat, but enough to remove the jagged edges. She carved out niches for shelves and a deep, wide space for the hearth that would give the home its name. The third year was the year of the structure. She needed timber. She couldn't afford to buy it, so she used the trees on her own land. She felled mature pines, limbed them, and with Jasper's help, dragged them to the site. Using a two-man saw by herself, a grueling, awkward process, she cut them into massive support beams. She treated the wood with a mixture of pine tar and tallow to make it water-resistant. Hoisting the main ridge beam into place was the most dangerous part of the entire project. It took her a week of planning and 2 full days of careful, heart-pounding work with ropes and levers. But when it was done, the skeleton of her home was in place. She laid thick wooden planks over the beams to form the ceiling. Then came the most ingenious part of her father's design, the ventilation. She spent 2 months drilling 2 shafts up through the 20 feet of earth and rock above the dwelling. One shaft was directly over the hearth, a chimney lined with smooth stones. The other was at the far end of the room, an intake flue. The physics were simple. The fire would draw cold, fresh air down the intake across the room and expel the smoke up the chimney, creating constant, passive air circulation. No dampness, no stale air. She built a small adjoining chamber for Jasper, with its own ventilation and access from the main room. He would not be left to the mercy of the winter. The final stage was the roof. She layered it with clay, then gravel for drainage, and finally thick mats of sod she painstakingly cut from the meadow below. By the end of the year, the roof was a living green carpet, already home to wildflowers and tough mountain grasses. From a distance, it looked as if the hill had simply grown a small green mound at its base. The 4th year was the year of provision. With the structure complete, Elara focused on sustenance. She expanded her garden, planting calorie-dense crops, potatoes, beans, squash, and corn. She worked tirelessly, tending the plants, and when the harvest came, it was immense. For months, her home was filled with the smells of preservation. She dried beans and corn. She canned squash and tomatoes in jars she bought with the money from selling firewood. She salted meat from the 2 deer she was able to hunt. She built the furniture from leftover timber, a solid table, a bench, a bed frame. She chinked every tiny crack with a mixture of clay and moss. She carved a heavy 3-inch thick door from a single pine log and fitted it with iron hinges she had bartered for. She stacked 4 years' worth of firewood in a dry alcove just inside the entrance. On the 1st day of October, in the 4th year, she moved in. She swept the dirt floor one last time, lit a small, welcoming fire in the sunken hearth, and closed the great wooden door behind her. The noise of the world, the wind, the distant sounds of the town, all of it vanished. There was only a profound, comforting silence, broken by the gentle crackle of the fire. The town had all but forgotten her. The joke had grown stale. Her folly was just a strange mound on a hill nobody visited. Silas Croft had finished his magnificent house, and he threw lavish parties where people drank whiskey behind his giant windows and felt very modern and secure. Prospect Creek went about its business, confident in its own permanence. In the last week of October, the signs began. Elara saw them first. The deer herds, which should have still been in the high country, moved down into the valley in a single, silent mass. The squirrels, usually territorial and chaotic, worked in a kind of frantic, communal terror, stripping every last pine cone from the trees. A flock of geese, flying south, turned back mid-flight and disappeared over the northern ridge, choosing to face the cold, rather than fly over the valley. Then came the silence. For 3 days, a strange, unnatural hush fell over the land. No birds sang. The wind died completely. The air grew thin and carried a sharp, metallic scent, like ozone before a lightning strike. The sky turned a strange, bruised shade of yellow-grey. Elara knew. She checked her father's journals. The barometric pressure readings he had predicted were there, plunging lower than she had ever seen. She spent 1 full day on final preparations. She brought Jasper into his stable, giving him fresh hay and water. She sealed the secondary ventilation shaft, leaving only the main flue open. She checked the seal on her door, packing it with extra strips of wool. She brought in the last of her dried herbs. For a fleeting moment, she considered walking into town. She thought of standing in the mayor's office, of trying to warn them. The image of their faces flashed in her mind. The mayor's condescending smile, Croft's mocking laugh, Dr. Albright's smug certainty. They would not listen. They would call her a madwoman, a harbinger of doom. They would laugh even harder. Her warning would be just another foolish act, another reason to say someone was pulling an Elara. She turned away from the door. Her duty was to the knowledge her father had given her, and to the life she had built. She could not save those who refused to see. On the morning of November the 5th, the first snowflake fell. It was not a gentle flake. It was large and heavy, and it was followed by another, and another, and then 1 billion more. Within an hour, the world was gone, erased by a blinding vertical wall of white. The temperature plummeted. Then the wind came. It did not howl. It was a solid thing, a physical blow against the landscape, a thing of mythic violence. It screamed, a high, thin shriek that drilled its way through the walls of the town's proper houses. The first catastrophic failure was Silas Croft's mansion. The great picture windows, his pride and joy, flexed under the impossible pressure of the wind. Then, with a sound like a cannon shot, they exploded inward, spraying the opulent rooms with razor-sharp shards of glass. The wind rushed in, tearing paintings from the walls and extinguishing the great fire in his hearth in a blast of snow and soot. The house was rendered uninhabitable in less than a minute. Throughout the town, lesser disasters unfolded. The weight of the snow, accumulating at a rate of a foot an hour, was immense. The roof of the general store began to groan, then splinter. The telegraph lines, coated in a foot of ice, snapped with a sound like rifle fire, cutting Prospect Creek off from the world. The town's water tower, its pipes frozen solid, cracked down the side with a great metallic groan. Panic set in. Families huddled in their homes, stuffing rags into the cracks around windows and doors, but the cold was a living entity. It found its way in. It leached the warmth from their fires, from their bodies, from their hope. Inside the sunken hearth, Elara sat at her table, reading a journal by the light of a single candle. The storm was not a shriek, but a distant, muffled hum, like the sound of a faraway river. The air was a steady, comfortable 60 degrees. The stone walls around her radiated a gentle, constant warmth, the stored energy of a long-gone summer. She had burned only 3 logs since the storm began. A pot of bean soup simmered on the hearth, filling the air with a savoury scent. Jasper was calm in his stall, munching on hay, shielded from the apocalypse raging just a few feet above his head. The storm raged for 3 days without pause. On the 4th day, the wind died, but the snow continued to fall, a thick, silent, relentless curtain. By the 5th day, Prospect Creek was buried. The snow was 15 feet deep in the valley, drifted up to 30 feet against the sides of buildings. Only the tallest roofs and chimneys were visible, stark and black against a world of impossible white. Survival became a matter of hours. Food was running out. Firewood, for those who still had a safe chimney, was dwindling. The cold was absolute. It was Dr. Albright who made the first move. His own house, well built but conventional, had become an icebox. His wife was shivering uncontrollably, her lips blue. He had seen 2 of his neighbors die of exposure in their own homes. His medical knowledge was useless. Penicillin could not fight a temperature of 20 below zero inside a living room. He remembered the joke about Elara's folly. He remembered the mound on the hill, a mound that would now be a deep, insulating dome of snow. It took him 2 hours to struggle the 400 yards to her door. He was half frozen, his face a mask of ice, his professional pride frozen and shattered. He saw the wisp of smoke rising from her stone chimney, a sight so impossible, so miraculous, that he thought he was hallucinating. He dug frantically at the snowbank where he guessed her door would be, his gloved hands raw and clumsy. Finally, he found the top of the wooden frame. He hammered on it with his fist, his shouts swallowed by the snow. The door swung inward. A wave of warm, breathable air washed over him. Elara stood there, silhouetted by the firelight. She held the lantern. Her expression was calm, unreadable. "Doctor," she said, her voice even. Elara looked past him at the devastation. Elara looked past him at the devastation. She looked down at the humbled man. She said nothing of his mockery, nothing of his dire predictions. She simply nodded. "Bring your wife," she said, "and tell anyone else who can make it." He stumbled back to the town, a man reborn with a desperate purpose. The news spread like wildfire through the freezing houses. The first to arrive were the Miller family, their youngest child wrapped in every blanket they owned. Elara took the child from them, sat him by the fire, and gave him a warm bowl of soup. She directed the family to a space along the wall. They kept coming, a slow, miserable procession of the humbled. The gossips from the general store, the men who had laughed at her, the children who had taunted her. She organized them without raising her million. She organized them without raising her vast stores of food, ensuring everyone had something hot to eat. She showed them how her ventilation system worked, the simple genius of it. She moved through the crowded space with a quiet authority that no one dared to question. The last to arrive were Mayor Thompson and Silas Croft. They had held out the longest, their pride a poor shield against the killing cold. Croft's grand house was a hollowed-out tomb of ice. The mayor's home had been crushed by a falling, snow-laden tree. They were broken men. Croft, the wealthy rancher, had frostbite on his ears and fingers. Thompson, the man of authority, was weeping silently. They stood before Elara, just inside the door, the snow melting from their fine coats and pooling at their feet. "Vance," the mayor croaked, his voice raw. He couldn't finish. Silas Croft, the man who had mocked her more than any other, looked around the warm stone room. He saw the sturdy beams, the well-stocked shelves, the contented horse in its stall. He looked at the faces of his 34 neighbors, all of them alive because of the hole in the ground he had ridiculed. "You were right," Croft whispered, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "My God, you were right." Elara simply gestured to the last open space on the floor. There was work to be done. Survival was a practical matter, not an emotional one. For 6 more days, they lived in the Sunken Hearth. 41 souls in a space designed for one. But it was a space designed for survival. It held. The air remained fresh, the food held out, the warmth never failed. When the great thaw finally began, and the rescue parties from the next county finally broke through, they found the town of Prospect Creek destroyed. But they found its people alive, huddled in a green mound on the side of a granite hill. A week later, a town meeting was held in the wreckage of the church, the only building with a semi-intact roof. The entire town was there. Elara stood at the back, silent. Mayor Thompson stood before them, his face aged by a decade. "I have something to say," he began, his voice shaking. "We have all suffered. We have all lost our homes, our possessions. But we have not lost our lives. And the reason for that is one person. A person I dismissed. A person I ridiculed." He turned and looked directly at Elara. "Elara Vance tried to warn us. Not with words, but with action. She saw what was coming. We called her a fool. We laughed at her work. We named our own foolishness after her." He took a deep breath. "She was right, and we were wrong. We were proud and arrogant, and we were fools. Elara, on behalf of this town, I'm sorry. I was wrong." Then Silas Croft stood up. "A monument to wisdom. It is a sanctuary. I was the worst of all," he said, his booming voice now quiet and hoarse. "My house was a monument to pride. It was a death trap. Elara's house is a monument to wisdom. It is a sanctuary. I called her project a folly, but the folly was mine. I am sorry, Elara. Deeply sorry." Dr. Albright stood. "My science was book learning," he said. "Her wisdom was real. I apologize for my ignorance." One by one, others stood, offering their own quiet, shamed apologies. When they were finished, they all looked to Elara. She stepped forward, her expression as calm as ever. "Apologies are not necessary," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet space. "What is necessary is to learn. My father studied this valley. He respected it. He did not try to conquer it. He tried to understand it. Pride does not keep you warm. Glass windows do not stop the wind. Survival is not about what is modern. It is about what is durable, what is wise." She paused, looking at their faces. "If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach." And so, the rebuilding of Prospect Creek began. They did not rebuild the same way. They rebuilt with the hill, not on it. Under Elara's guidance, they began to construct their own earth-sheltered homes, their own sunken hearths. They learned about thermal mass, about sod roofs, about passive ventilation. They learned to work with the seasons, not against them. The phrase, "pulling an Elara," was reborn. It no longer meant to do something foolish. It came to mean acting with uncommon foresight, with quiet wisdom, and with a deep respect for the natural world. It was the highest compliment one could pay a person in the new town of Prospect Creek. Elara Vance never married. She never had children. She lived out her long life in the Sunken Hearth, Jasper her companion for many more years. She did not fully rejoin the community, but she was its heart. She was the quiet sage on the hill, the keeper of the knowledge that had saved them all. People brought their problems to her, not just about building, but about life. She would listen patiently and offer simple, practical advice. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87 on a warm summer evening. The entire town mourned her. They did not bury her in the town cemetery. They interred her in a small, stone-lined chamber she had prepared herself, deep within the hill, behind the sunken hearth. Her home was preserved exactly as she had left it, a monument and a lesson for all future generations. Years later, the town council affixed a simple bronze plaque to the great wooden door of her home. It did not list dates or accomplishments. It said only this: "When pride builds high, the wind will blow it down. When wisdom digs deep, the earth will keep it warm." She was right.